Throughout history, the shadows have whispered tales of unspeakable horrors, of individuals whose crimes have left an indelible mark on society. But who were these shadows lurking in the corners of the past, and what made them tick? Welcome to today's deep dive into some of the most chilling minds in history. In this video, we'll uncover the dark tales of 10 serial killers whose stories have both horrified and fascinated historians and criminal psychologists alike. From the cobblestone streets haunted by Jack the Ripper to the cold, calculated maneuvers of Ted Bundy, we're exploring the grim echelons of human behavior. Before we proceed, a word of caution. This video discusses topics involving murder and psychological manipulation, often in graphic detail. Viewer discretion is strongly advised, especially for younger audiences. A serial killer is typically defined as someone who murders 3 or more people, usually in service of irregular psychological pleasure, with the killings taking place over more than a month and including a significant period of time between them. Today, we delve into the minds behind the madness, uncovering what drives such individuals to commit these heinous acts. Buckle up. This journey is not for the faint-hearted. Let's start by defining what makes a serial killer. Unlike mass murderers who might kill multiple people at once, serial killers commit their crimes over a period, with significant breaks between each murder. This pattern not only allows them to evade detection but also to refine their methods and select their victims. The FBI defines this as the act of killing 3 or more individuals, typically for psychological gratification, with each murder occurring at different times. It is their cooling-off period that distinguishes them distinctly from other types of offenders. Delving deeper into their psyche, serial killers often exhibit certain psychological traits that are both fascinating and horrifying. Many possess what psychologists call the McDonald Triad, a history of arson, cruelty to animals, and bedwetting past a certain age. They may also show traits such as a lack of empathy, manipulative behaviors, and a grandiose sense of self-worth. Narcissism and a profound need for control are particularly common, driving them to reclaim power in the most gruesome way possible. Over time, serial killers' atrocities have shaped modern criminal psychology. By studying these individuals, psychologists and criminologists have developed profiles that help predict and potentially prevent future crimes. Techniques such as offender profiling, which involves detecting the key personality and behavioral characteristics of the criminal based on the crimes they commit, were pioneered through the study of serial killers. These profiles not only assist in capturing these criminals but also play a crucial role in understanding the underlying psychological disturbances that propel such extreme behaviors. Venture back with me to the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, where in the late 1880s, a sinister figure known only as Jack the Ripper emerged from the shadows. This enigmatic killer, whose true identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of crime, terrorized the Whitechapel district with a series of gruesome murders that shook society to its core. Jack the Ripper's reign of terror was marked by the brutal murders of at least 5 women, all of whom were prostitutes living in the slums of London. The Ripper's method was particularly savage, characterized by deep throat slashes, abdominal and genital area mutilations, and the removal of internal organs. The precision of the mutilations led some to speculate that the killer might have had surgical knowledge, adding a layer of macabre fascination to the already chilling deeds. The Ripper murders cast a spotlight on the dire conditions of the East End and highlighted the stark inequalities of Victorian society. Public outrage grew as the police were left floundering, unable to apprehend the killer. The press had a field day with the sensational details of the murders, and the fear and fascination with the Ripper phenomena made it a lasting topic in public discourse, affecting cultural outputs from literature to later media portrayals. Why does Jack the Ripper continue to captivate the public's imagination? Perhaps the mystery surrounding his identity or the grim details of his crimes seem to leap straight from a horror tale. Or maybe it's the way his story intersects with the dark corners of Victorian society, offering a glimpse into a world that is both distant and eerily familiar. Whatever the reason, Jack the Ripper stands as a chilling emblem of the shadowy depths of human nature. Crossing the Atlantic to the bustling streets of Chicago in the 1890s, we encounter another sinister figure, H. Holmes, who crafted one of the most chilling narratives in the annals of American crime. Born Herman Webster Mudgett, Holmes was a charismatic con artist and a meticulous planner. His most infamous creation was the Murder Castle, a hotel designed specifically for the execution of his macabre plans. Built during the frenzy of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, this structure was a labyrinth of secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, and a basement equipped with acid vats and cremation furnaces. Holmes's methods were the stuff of nightmares. Guests and employees disappearing were common at the murder castle. Holmes took advantage of the influx of visitors to the World's Fair, luring many back to his hotel. There, his victims met unimaginable ends, suffocated, gassed, or dismembered. Holmes's operation was systematic, allowing him to carry out numerous murders while maintaining a facade of respectability to the outside world. The accurate number of his victims remains unknown, but estimates run into the hundreds. Holmes's reign of terror concluded when he was finally captured in 1894. His trial was a sensation that gripped the nation, revealing the horrifying extent of his crimes. In 1896, Holmes met his end at the gallows, his calm demeanor persisting even in his final moments. The legacy of H. Holmes is profound, highlighting not only the depths of human depravity but also the era's dark fascination with death and the macabre, which Holmes exploited to horrific effect. Moving into the Roaring Twenties and the somber 30s, we meet Albert Fish, one of the most heinous figures in the annals of crime. Known by chilling monikers such as the Gray Man, Werewolf of Wisteria, and Brooklyn Vampire, Fish's crimes were particularly grotesque, involving cannibalism, torture, and mutilation. His targets were often vulnerable children, whom he confessed to luring under the guise of kindness, only to unleash unspeakable horrors upon them. Fish's psychological profile is a stark testament to the darkest potentials of the human psyche. He exhibited masochistic and sadistic tendencies from an early age, which escalated into severe psychopathy. Psychiatrists later determined that Fish suffered from hallucinations and delusions, believing himself to be acting on instructions from God. His letters detailing his crimes were a window into a profoundly disturbed mind, filled with a mix of religious fervor and brutal compulsion. The investigation into Fish's activities climaxed after the disappearance of Grace Budd, when Fish unwisely sent a horrifying letter to her family, bragging about his crimes. This letter, traced through the envelope's emblem, led detectives directly to Fish. His arrest was a pivotal moment, showcasing early forensic techniques like handwriting analysis and the use of the postal system to track a suspect, methodologies that were still in their infancy. Fish's trial and subsequent execution in 1936 sent ripples through American law enforcement and justice systems. His case underscored the need for advanced investigative techniques and better psychiatric evaluations, influencing the development of modern criminal profiling. Fish's ability to evade capture for so long also led to increased coordination among police departments across state lines, setting precedents for handling cases involving interstate crimes. Stepping back into the dim corridors of the early 17th century, we encounter the chilling tale of Elizabeth Báthory, a Hungarian noblewoman dubbed the Blood Countess. Legend has it that Báthory's quest for eternal youth led her to commit atrocities that are almost too horrific to believe. She is accused of torturing and killing hundreds of young women, drawn from the local peasantry and even from gentry families, making her one of the most creative female serial killers in history. The legends surrounding Báthory paint a picture of a woman lost to her sadistic impulses, often bathing in the blood of her victims to preserve her own beauty. However, separating fact from fiction in her story is a complex task. Historical records do show trials and testimonies of witnesses who described gruesome scenes, but the extent of her guilt remains shrouded in mystery. Did Elizabeth Báthory truly commit these heinous acts, or was she the victim of a politically motivated smear campaign? The veracity likely lies somewhere in between, obscured by centuries of lore and speculation. Elizabeth Báthory's noble status played a critical role in how her alleged crimes were handled. Her family's influence initially shielded her from suspicion and later from execution. Instead of being sentenced to death, Báthory was confined to her castle in Kachtis, where she lived in seclusion until her death. This form of punishment reflects the complexities of dealing with high-status individuals accused of serious crimes, highlighting the interplay between power, justice, and societal norms during the era. Journey with me to the Soviet Union during the latter half of the 20th century, where a shadowy figure known as Andrei Chikatilo earned the grim moniker, the Butcher of Rostov. Over more than a decade, Chikatilo committed at least 52 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. His victims, often young vagrants and runaways, were lured under the pretense of friendship or assistance, only to meet a brutal fate at his hands. Chikatilo's methods were gruesomely sadistic, involving mutilation and signs of cannibalism, leaving communities across the Soviet Union terrorized and mystified. The grim success of Chikatilo in evading capture for years was not solely due to his cunning nature. It was also a reflection of the societal and systemic limitations of the time. The Soviet Union's bureaucratic and secretive nature, combined with a police force that was often ill-equipped to deal with such sophisticated crimes, created a perfect storm. There was also a general reluctance to acknowledge that such evil could exist under the supposed utopia of Soviet rule, which led to a lack of public awareness and media coverage regarding the severity and extent of his crimes. Chikatilo's reign of terror finally came to an end in 1990, just as the Soviet Union itself was beginning to crumble. His capture was a combination of dedicated detective work and sheer chance, when a routine sweep caught him emerging from the woods, suspiciously clean in an otherwise muddy environment. His trial was a media spectacle, a stark contrast to the secrecy that had shrouded his crimes. In 1994, after a sensational trial that gripped the anew free states of the former Soviet Union, Chikatilo was executed. His case forced a re-evaluation of criminal investigative techniques and police protocols in Russia, leading to significant reforms in how serial crimes were handled. Shift now to the late 20th century United States, where we meet Aileen Wuornos, a figure who stands out not only for her crimes but also for her tragic life story. Wuornos is often cited as one of the few well-known female serial killers. Her life was marred by devastating hardships. She was abandoned by her mother, her father committed suicide while in prison for sex crimes, and she endured a childhood of abuse and neglect. Turning to a life of prostitution at a young age, Wuornos's story took a dark turn when she killed 7 men over a period from 1989 to 1990, claiming they had either raped or attempted to rape her while she was working. Wuornos's criminal activities began in a violent self-defense scenario, which spiraled into a series of killings. Her actions, she claimed, were responses to the immediate threats she perceived while engaging in sex work along Florida's highways. However, as investigations unfolded, the complexity of her mental state and the premeditative nature of some of her actions came to light, challenging the initial view of her as a mere victim reacting to trauma. The trial and execution of Aileen Wuornos captured the attention of the media and the public, largely due to the rarity of female serial killers and the sensational nature of her crimes. Her story was adapted into documentaries and feature films, most notably the movie Monster, for which Charlize Theron won an Academy Award. Wuornos's portrayal in the media sparked significant discussions on issues such as the treatment of women in society, mental health, and the criminal justice system's handling of female offenders. Her case challenged the stereotypes of female criminality, showing a complex interplay of victimization and blame. Travel with us to the late 1970s in northern England, where Peter Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, cast a long shadow of fear across the region. Between 1975 and 1980, Sutcliffe murdered 13 women and attempted to murder 7 others. His victims, often mistaken as predominantly prostitutes, actually included women from various walks of life, challenging the initial assumptions about his target selection. His method of brutal attacks, primarily using a hammer and a knife, not only horrified the public but also baffled law enforcement agencies. The search for the Yorkshire Ripper became one of the largest and most exhaustive manhunts in British history. Police efforts were met with significant challenges, including the vast amount of misleading information, notably a hoax tape that diverted investigative paths for months. Over 5 years, thousands of officers sifted through tens of thousands of interviews and statements, gradually piecing together the clues that would eventually lead to Sutcliffe's capture. His eventual arrest in 1981 was not the result of a breakthrough in detective work but rather a routine traffic stop that linked him to the Ripper's crimes through tire tracks and other forensic evidence. Sutcliffe's case was heavily followed by the media, whose coverage both fueled public fear and influenced the investigation. The press often sensationalized the details of the murders, creating a climate of hysteria and sometimes hampering police work by putting undue pressure on the force to find the killer. Critically, the investigation was marred by significant errors, including the dismissal of key testimonies and evidence that could have led to an earlier capture. Reflections on the case have since led to widespread criticism of the police methods and a re-evaluation of how such serious investigations should be handled, particularly regarding communication and the assessment of credible leads. In the mid-1980s, California was gripped by a palpable fear emanating from the heinous activities of one man, Richard Ramirez, dubbed the Night Stalker. His crime spree included a horrifying array of burglaries, sexual assaults, and murders that spanned from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Ramirez struck indiscriminately, targeting victims of varying ages and backgrounds, which only intensified the public's terror. Each nightfall brought with it the possibility of his sinister presence, as communities lay awake, fearing they might be next. Ramirez's crimes were not only gruesome in their execution but were also marked by chilling ritualistic elements. He was known to draw pentagrams and leave symbols associated with satanic worship at crime scenes, sometimes forcing his victims to swear allegiance to Satan before their deaths. His modus operandi included an array of brutal methods. He used handguns, knives, tire irons, and even his fists to inflict his terror. This blend of brutality and devil worship sent shockwaves through the public and law enforcement communities alike, adding a coating of complication to the fear he instilled. The saga of the Night Stalker concluded as dramatically as it unfolded. In August 1985, Ramirez was identified after a fingerprint lifted from a stolen vehicle was matched to his records. His face was plastered across every news outlet, and it was a group of alert civilians in East Los Angeles who ultimately captured him. Recognizing him from the news, they pursued and subdued him, holding him until the police arrived. His trial was a media circus, reflecting the profound impact of his crimes on the psyche of Californians. Convicted of numerous counts of murder, sexual assault, and burglary, Ramirez received the death sentence, highlighting the severity of his actions and the relief of a community that had been haunted by his shadow for far too long. Enter the enigmatic world of Ted Bundy, a name synonymous with the duality of human nature. Throughout the 1970s, Bundy epitomized the terrifying contrast between outward charm and monstrous depravity. He was articulate, educated, and charismatic, traits he manipulated to win the trust of his victims and society at large. Yet beneath this veneer lurked a brutal killer responsible for the assault and murder of at least 30 young women across multiple states. Bundy's ability to blend into the everyday, coupled with his chilling predilection for revisiting his crime scenes and the grotesque acts he performed there, marked a dark chapter in American criminal history. Bundy's cunning was further showcased by his dramatic escapes from custody, heightening his notoriety and the manhunt trailing him. His first escape was from a Colorado courthouse, where he jumped from a second-story window while preparing for a hearing. He was recaptured but escaped again by sawing through the ceiling of his cell. Bundy's final run for freedom ended in Florida, where his last and most fierce crimes led to his recapture. The escalation of his violence and the chaos he left in his wake added layers of urgency to his pursuit and eventual recapture. Bundy's trial was nothing short of a spectacle, a disturbing theater that played out on national television. Representing himself in court, Bundy's face became as familiar as that of any celebrity, captivating and horrifying the American public. The media coverage was extensive, feeding a morbid curiosity about his personality and the gruesome details of his crimes. This exposure not only sensationalized his figure but also sparked important conversations about the nature of evil and the legal system's ability to contend with individuals like Bundy. His trial and its aftermath, culminating in his execution in 1989, remain a poignant reminder of the media's powerful role in shaping public perception of crime and justice. As we conclude our journey through the dark and twisted paths walked by some of history's most notorious serial killers, we're left with profound insights into the psychological complexities that drive such extreme behaviors. From the calculated brutality of H.H. Holmes to the charismatic deceit of Ted Bundy, each case has shed light on the various facets of criminal psychology, enhancing our understanding of human nature's darker sides. Throughout the decades, these chilling tales have not only captivated public interest but have also driven significant advancements in criminal science and law enforcement techniques. Modern profiling methods, enhanced forensic technologies, and improved interagency collaboration are just some of the developments that have stemmed from the need to better understand and catch such elusive predators. We invite you to share your thoughts on these cases and discuss any psychological or investigative details that struck you the most. What lessons do you think we can learn from these historical figures? Comment below with your insights. And if you're fascinated by the mysteries of the human mind and the shadows that lurk within society, don't forget to subscribe to the Phantasmal Eternity channel for more content that delves deep into the realms of true crime and psychological exploration. Your engagement helps us keep exploring these complex topics. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay curious and critical in your journey through the mysteries of history.